The text message from Christine lit up my phone screen. Emergency family meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. Don't you dare say no. I stared at those words, my stomach already knotting. Being the successful one in the family meant every emergency meeting inevitably led to the same thing. Someone needed money. Again. My name is Zara, and I've spent the last decade being my family's personal ATM. While they see a thriving businesswoman who has it easy, they don't see the 80-hour weeks or the sacrifices I've made to build my consulting firm from scratch. You're not seriously going, are you? Sierra asked, watching me gather my things from across our shared office space. That's the third emergency this month. What choice do I have? I sighed, slipping on my blazer. Last time I missed one, Dad didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. Maybe that wasn't such a bad thing, she muttered, but I pretended not to hear. I arrived at Christine's house at 7:05 p.m. Everyone was already there, scattered around her living room like vultures waiting to feast. Theo sprawled on the couch, probably hiding another betting slip in his pocket. Adeline sat cross-legged on the floor, perfectly manicured nails tapping away at her phone. Dad occupied his usual armchair, looking stern as ever. "Finally!" Christine exclaimed. "We've been waiting." "Some of us have to work," I replied, choosing to stand rather than sit. "What's the emergency?" "We're planning a family reunion," Adeline piped up, finally looking up from her phone. "Everyone's coming. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even Great-Aunt Martha." I waited for the other shoe to drop. "We need you to fund it," Christine said, as if announcing the weather. "The venue alone is $5,000, and then there's catering, decorations." "No." The word left my mouth before I could stop it. The room fell silent. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me in disbelief. "What do you mean, no?" Theo sat up straight. "It's for family." "I mean no," I repeated, stronger this time. "I'm done being the family bank." Christine's face reddened. "After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I laughed, but there was no humour in it. "Like what, Christine? Like borrowing 10 grand for your business venture that never happened? Or you, Theo, the gambling debt I covered last Christmas?" "That's different," Theo protested. "I was in trouble." "You're always in trouble," my voice rose. "All of you, always needing something, always taking, never giving back. I'm tired of it." "Zara," Dad's voice carried that familiar note of disapproval. "This is about family unity. Your mother would have wanted—" "Don't." I held up my hand. "Don't you dare use Mom to manipulate me. She would have wanted you all to stand on your own 2 feet. "You've changed," Adeline said quietly. "Success has made you selfish." That word, selfish, hit me like a slap. I'd heard it so many times over the years whenever I dared to say no, whenever I tried to set boundaries. "You want to talk about selfish?" I grabbed my purse. "Look in the mirror, all of you, I'm done." "If you walk out that door," Christine called after me, "don't expect us to be there when you need us." I paused at the doorway, turning back one last time. When have you ever been there when I needed you? The door slammed behind me with a satisfying bang. In my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I felt something shift inside me. Years of resentment crystallized into determination. My phone buzzed continuously, messages from all of them, ranging from guilt trips to outright threats. I switched it off. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Sierra. "How bad was it?" she asked. "I finally did it," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. "I said no." "About damn time," she paused. "Are you okay?" "No," I admitted, "but I will be. They need to learn they can't keep using me like this. They need to learn about consequences." "What are you going to do?" I took a long sip of wine, an idea forming in my mind. "I'm going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget, something that will either make them or break them." "Zara." Sierra's voice held a note of warning. "Don't worry," I said, already opening my laptop. "This isn't about revenge. It's about growth. They just don't know it yet." As I began typing, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling them. And if my plan worked, my family would thank me for it someday. or hate me forever. Either way, I was done being their safety net. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed overhead as I tried to make sense of what had happened. 1 minute I was presenting to clients, the next I was doubled over, unable to breathe. Now here I was, hooked up to monitors, watching my blood pressure numbers dance across the screen. "Ms. Whitney?" A doctor in blue scrubs approached my bed. "I'm Dr. Reynolds. Your test results show you've experienced a severe panic attack, complicated by exhaustion and dangerously high stress levels." I almost laughed. "Stress? I can't be here for stress. I have meetings tomorrow, deadlines." "You're not going anywhere," he interrupted firmly. "Your body is sending you a clear message. Ignore it, and next time could be much worse." A nurse appeared with admission papers. "We're keeping you for observation, at least 48 hours. My phone lit up again. Another message from Christine. I'd been ignoring them all week, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hope you're proud of yourself. Dad's devastated. The reunion's cancelled. Thanks to you." The monitor beeped as my heart rate spiked. "I'll take that," the nurse said, plucking the phone from my hands. "Doctor's orders, no stress triggers." Later that evening, Sierra arrived with an overnight bag and my laptop. "Don't even think about working," she warned, seeing my eyes light up at the sight of my computer. "But I thought you might want to handle some personal matters." "Like what?" She sat on the edge of my bed, her expression serious. "Like your will, Zara. This is a wake-up call. What if it had been something worse?" I started to protest, but the words died in my throat. She was right. If something happened to me, my family would tear each other apart over my assets. "I need a lawyer," I said finally. "Already called Barrett," Sierra replied. "He's on his way." Barrett arrived an hour later, leather briefcase in hand. As Emery's brother and a family friend, he knew exactly what I was dealing with. "Interesting timing," he said, pulling up a chair. "Emery told me about the reunion drama." "Then you understand why this needs to be done carefully," I replied. "I want to help them, Barrett, but not in the way they expect." He opened his briefcase. "I'm listening." For the next 2 hours, we crafted something that was part will, part intervention. Each family member would receive a letter leading them to a specific charity or organization that mirrored their personal struggles. "Christine needs to understand what real need looks like," I explained, watching Barrett take notes. "Send her to the women's shelter downtown. Theo should work with gambling addiction support groups. Adeline." I paused. "Youth self-esteem programs. She needs to see beyond appearances." "And the inheritance?" Barrett asked. "They'll get it, but only after 6 months of documented volunteer work with their assigned organizations. No shortcuts, no buying their way out." Barrett whistled low. "They're going to be furious." "Good," I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Maybe fury will motivate them to change. "What about your father?" I closed my eyes briefly. "The Veterans Center. He needs to remember what real sacrifice looks like." As Barrett drafted the documents, Sierra squeezed my hand. "Are you sure about this?" "For the first time in years, yes." I opened my eyes, looking at the hospital ceiling. They need this. I need this. "There's one more thing," Barrett said, looking up from his paperwork. "To make this legally binding, we need to inform them while you're still in the hospital. It adds weight to the situation." "You want me to tell them now?" He nodded. "I'll call them in tomorrow. Let them think it's worse than it is. Sometimes people need a shock to wake them up." The thought of facing them made my chest tight, but the monitor's steady beeping reminded me why I was here in the first place. "Do it," I said. "Call them all in. It's time they understood what they've done to me." After they left, I lay in the darkness, listening to the quiet hum of hospital machinery. My phone sat silent in the drawer, but I could imagine the messages piling up, the missed calls, the family group chat exploding with drama. For the first time since Mom died, I felt like I was taking control back. Maybe it was the medication, maybe it was the exhaustion, but I smiled as I drifted off to sleep, Tomorrow everything would change. They'd either hate me for it or thank me later, but either way, I was done being their crutch. Sometimes the biggest act of love is forcing people to stand on their own. The thought followed me into my dreams, where for once I wasn't running to anyone's rescue. I was simply standing still, watching them learn to save themselves. They filed into my hospital room like mourners at a funeral, faces drawn with worry and barely concealed expectation. Christine clutched her designer handbag like a shield. Theo couldn't stop fidgeting. Adeline kept glancing at her reflection in the window. Dad took the chair closest to my bed, trying to look concerned rather than calculating. Barrett stood by the window, briefcase ready. Sierra positioned herself near the door, arms crossed, watching. "Oh, sweetie," Christine started, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "Why didn't you tell us you were so ill?" "Because I'm not," I replied flatly. "I'm here because of stress, because of you, all of you." The room fell silent. "What's he doing here?" Theo asked, jerking his chin toward Barrett. "I've asked Barrett to help me revise my will," I said, watching their expressions shift. "Recent events have made me realize some changes are necessary." Christine straightened up immediately. "Of course you need to protect your assets. I completely understand. Let me finish," I cut her off. "Barrett, the letters, please." He opened his briefcase and distributed 4 sealed envelopes. My family stared at them like they might explode. "Open them," I instructed. The sound of tearing paper filled the room. I watched their faces transform as they read: confusion, shock, anger, disbelief. "This is a joke, right?" Adeline was the first to speak. "You want me to work at some youth centre? For 6 months? A gambling addiction centre?" Theo crumpled his letter. "Have you lost your mind?" Christine's face had gone pale. "A women's shelter? I don't. "You can and you will," I said firmly. "If you want any part of my estate, these are my terms. 6 months of documented volunteer work at your assigned organisations. No exceptions, no buying your way out." "This is ridiculous," Dad exploded, waving his letter. "The Veterans Centre? I served my country." "Exactly," I interrupted. "So, you should have no problem serving again, this time by helping others who've sacrificed everything." "And if we refuse," Christine demanded, "then you get nothing." I kept my voice steady. "My entire estate will go to these organisations instead." "You can't do this." Theo stood up, pacing. "It's not legal." "Actually," Barrett stepped forward, "it's completely legal. I've drawn up all the necessary documentation. Zara's conditions are clear and binding." "This is revenge," Adeline accused, tears smearing her perfect makeup. "For the reunion thing." "No," I said softly. "This is an intervention. Look at yourselves. Really look. Christine, when's the last time you earned your own money? Theo, how many times have I bailed you out? Adeline, do you even know who you are beneath all that superficial perfection? And me?" Dad's voice was dangerous and low. "What's my great sin?" "Enabling them," I replied, "teaching them that taking from others is easier than standing on their own feet." "You're our sister," Christine pleaded. "Our daughter. Family helps family." "I'm not helping by being your human ATM." I gestured at the hospital room. "Look where it's gotten me. This stops now." Sierra stepped forward. "I think Zara needs to rest. You all have your letters. The choice is yours." "Choice?" Theo laughed bitterly. "This is blackmail." "No," I corrected him. "This is tough love. Something I should have done years ago." They left one by one, Dad last of all. He paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Your mother would be ashamed," he said quietly. "No, Dad," I replied, feeling tears prick my eyes. "Mum would have done this years ago. She was stronger than any of us." After they left, Sierra sat on the edge of my bed. Well, that went about as well as expected. Barrett gathered his papers. "They'll come around. Or they won't. Either way, you've done the right thing." "Have I?" I whispered, suddenly uncertain. "You should have seen their faces." "I did," Sierra squeezed my hand, and beneath all that anger I saw something else. Fear, because for the first time, they're facing consequences. My phone buzzed. A message from Emery. Barrett told me what you did. About time someone shook them up. I'm here if you need me. I smiled slightly, remembering why Emery was the only family member who didn't get a letter. He'd built his business from scratch, never asking for handouts. Get some rest, Sierra ordered. The hard part's over. But as I lay there watching the sun set through my hospital window, I knew she was wrong. The hard part was just beginning. For all of us. 2 weeks after my hospital release, Sierra drove me to the women's shelter where Christine was supposed to be volunteering. We sat in the car watching the entrance. She won't show, I said, checking my watch. $10 says you're wrong, Sierra replied, pointing at a familiar figure hurrying up the street. Christine looked different. No designer bag, no expensive jewellery. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain sweater. She hesitated at the entrance, then squared her shoulders and went inside. Well, I'll be damned, I muttered. 1 down, 3 to go, Sierra said, starting the car. Where to next? The gambling addiction centre was across town. We found Theo outside smoking a cigarette, deep in conversation with an older man. As we watched, the man broke down crying. Theo awkwardly patted his shoulder, then pulled out his phone and appeared to be showing him something. That's Marcus, a voice said behind us. We turned to see the centre's director. Your brother's been helping him set up a budgeting app. Seems Theo has quite a knack for connecting with our members. Takes one to know one, I suppose. My throat tightened. He's actually showing up regularly? 3 times a week like clockwork. Even started attending the sessions himself. The youth centre was next. Through the window we spotted Adeline sitting in a circle with teenage girls. Her face was bare of makeup, and she was gesturing animatedly as she spoke. One of the girls wiped away tears while nodding. What's she saying? I wondered aloud. A staff member passing by overheard me. Sharing her story about social media addiction and body image issues. The girls really relate to her. She's organising a real beauty workshop for next week. Adeline, my sister Adeline, the woman nodded. She's been a revelation. Says she's finally finding purpose beyond her Instagram followers. Last stop was the Veterans Centre. My stomach churned as we pulled into the parking lot. Dad's car was there, but so were several others I recognised from family gatherings. Inside, we found Dad in the recreation room, playing chess with an elderly veteran. Uncle Rob was helping with physical therapy, and Aunt Jane was organising care packages. Your father's been talking up the centre to everyone he knows, the coordinator told me. He's recruited half his golf club as volunteers. Says it reminds him of the camaraderie he felt in service. I don't understand, I said to Sierra as we left. They're actually doing it. All of them. Maybe they needed a push, she suggested. Or maybe they needed purpose more than they needed money. That evening, my phone lit up with a message from Christine. Met a woman today. 3 kids escaping abuse. Reminded me of Mom before she met Dad. Never realised how lucky we were. Then Theo. Helped a guy today. He lost everything to betting, just like I almost did. Feels good to be on the other side. Adeline sent a selfie, her face natural, surrounded by smiling teenage girls. They think I'm inspiring them, but it's the other way around. Dad's message was last and shortest. Your mother would be proud of all of us. I sat on my couch reading and rereading the messages. Sierra brought me a glass of wine. Having second thoughts about your revenge plan? She asked. It wasn't about revenge, I protested. Not really. No, she raised an eyebrow. Okay, maybe a little, I admitted. But I never expected this. My phone buzzed again. A message from Barrett. Emery and I dropped by the Veterans Centre today. Your dad introduced us to everyone as my daughter's family. First time he's acknowledged me as anything but his lawyer. You know what the funny thing is? I said to Sierra. I thought I was teaching them a lesson about money, about not depending on me, but they're learning something else entirely. They're learning who they are without the safety net, Sierra nodded, without the roles they've been playing their whole lives. The entitled sister, the gambling brother, the vain sister, the demanding father. I took a sip of wine. Maybe those were just masks they got stuck behind. And what about you? Sierra asked. What mask are you taking off? I thought about it. The savior, the ATM, the one who always has to fix everything. And how does it feel? I smiled, remembering Christine's message, Theo's determination, Adeline's bare face, Dad's simple words. It feels like freedom, I said. For all of us. Sierra raised her glass. To freedom, then. And to karma, which turns out to be a better teacher than any of us could have planned. We clinked glasses, and I felt the last knot of tension in my chest finally begin to unwind. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's giving people the chance to surprise themselves. The family meeting wasn't my idea. Christine called it. 1 month into their volunteer work. This time we met at my house. Neutral territory. They arrived together and I barely recognized them. Christine's designer clothes had been replaced with practical wear. Theo's nervous energy had calmed, and Adeline's face showed actual laugh lines instead of Botox. "We need to talk," Christine said as they settled into my living room, "about what you did to us." I braced myself. "Okay, talk." "You manipulated us," Theo started. "Used your money to force us into this." "You're right," I admitted. "I did." "You had no right," Adeline added, but her voice lacked its usual bite. "Maybe not," I agreed. "But tell me honestly, would you have done any of this otherwise?" Silence filled the room. "I met a woman today," Christine said suddenly. She reminded me of me, constantly asking her sister for money, making excuses, playing victim. I watched her and felt ashamed. "At least you didn't gamble away your kid's college fund," Theo muttered. "Had to talk down a guy today who did exactly that. Kept thinking about all the times I promised to stop betting, all the times you bailed me out." "My girls," Adeline said softly. She'd started calling the teenagers at the centre her girls. "They showed me their Instagram accounts today, all the filters, the editing. I saw myself in every single one of them. That desperate need to be perfect." Dad cleared his throat. "The men at the centre. Some of them lost everything. Family, homes, dignity. And here I was, treating my own daughter like a bank." "I didn't do this to punish you," I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. "I did it because we were all drowning. Me trying to save everyone. You expecting to be saved." "You could have just talked to us," Christine protested. "Would you have listened?" I asked. "Or would you have called me selfish again, manipulated me with guilt until I gave in, like you always did?" More silence. "I hate what you did," Theo said finally, "but I needed it. We all did." "The funny thing is," Adeline added, "I don't even care about the inheritance anymore. These kids, they need me. Really need me. Not my money, not my connections, just me. That's what Mum always tried to teach us," Dad said quietly. "Service to others. Remember how she volunteered everywhere? We used to think she was wasting her time." "She was the strong one," I said. "I just copied her playbook." Christine stood up suddenly. "I'm angry at you, Zara. For the manipulation, for the ultimatum. But I'm also grateful. And I don't know how to feel about that." "Welcome to personal growth," I replied. "It's messy." "The shelter needs help renovating their children's playroom," Christine said after a moment. "I was thinking, maybe we could all pitch in. As a family." "My girls could paint a mural," Adeline offered. "They're amazing artists." "Some of the guys from the centre are good with construction," Dad added. "I could ask them to supervise." "I can handle the budget," Theo said. "Make sure we get the most value for our money." I sat back, watching them plan, their excitement building. Sierra's words echoed in my mind. Maybe they needed purpose more than they needed money. "One condition," I said, interrupting their planning. "Whatever we do it together. No more divisions, no more keeping score." "Does this mean you're speaking to us again?" Adeline asked hopefully. "I never stopped speaking to you," I corrected. "I just stopped enabling you. There's a difference." Dad stood up, walking to where I sat. His eyes were wet. "I failed you as a father. Failed all of you, really. Got so caught up in what we were entitled to, I forgot what we were capable of." "We all failed each other," I said, standing to hug him. "But we're fixing it now. One by one, they joined the hug until we were all tangled together, laughing and crying at the same time. "So," Christine said as we finally broke apart, "about that playroom renovation. I'll call Barrett," I offered. "He can help with any permits we need." "And Emery," Adeline added. "He's good at organising projects." As they left that evening, making plans and assigning tasks, I felt something shift in the air. The old dynamics of resentment and dependency were being replaced by something new, something healthier. My phone buzzed with a message from Sierra. "How did it go?" I typed back, "They're still mad, but they're also grateful. And maybe that's exactly where we need to be right now." Because sometimes the best families are the ones that break apart and rebuild themselves, stronger than before. The women's shelter playroom transformation was in full swing when I arrived that Saturday morning. Paint cans, drop cloths, and tools cluttered the space, but what caught my attention was my family, actually working together. Adeline stood on a ladder, directing her teenage artists as they sketched a forest scene across one wall. Their design incorporated inspiring words hidden among the trees: strength, hope, dream. "Look who finally showed up," Christine called out, roller in hand. "We started without you." "Someone had to bring coffee," I said, holding up the carrier of drinks. "Where's Theo?" "Outside with Dad and the veterans building the storage units," she replied. "They're like a well-oiled machine out there." I headed to the courtyard, where Dad was showing two teenagers how to measure wood properly while Theo calculated materials with a contractor. "No, see, if we adjust this design slightly," Theo was saying, "we can save 20% on materials without compromising quality." The contractor nodded approvingly. "You've got a good head for this, son." Dad spotted me and waved. "Perfect timing. We need another set of hands." For the next few hours, I moved between groups, painting, building, and watching my family in their element. Christine organised donations of toys and books, handling everything with the same efficiency she once applied to shopping sprees. "Maria's coming in today," she told me during a water break. "The woman I mentioned? With 3 kids." "The one who reminded you of Mum," she nodded. "We found her a job. Administrative work at a law firm. She starts Monday." "You did that?" "We did that," she corrected. "The shelter staff and I. Turns out my networking skills are good for something besides finding the next designer sale." Inside, Adeline was sitting with her girls during their break, showing them something on her phone. "That's me at your age," she said. "All those filters, all that makeup. I thought it made me special. Now I look at it and don't even recognize myself." "But you're so pretty without all that stuff," one girl said. Adeline's smile was genuine. "Took me 30 years and a very stubborn sister to figure that out." By late afternoon, the playroom had transformed. Bright murals covered the walls, new storage units lined up neatly, and donated toys filled fresh-painted shelves. Dad and his veteran friends had even installed a reading nook with cushions. "This is incredible," the shelter director said, wiping tears. "The children, they've never had anything like this." "We're not done yet," Theo announced. "The guys from my support group, they're organising a fundraiser, gaming tournament, all proceeds to the shelter. And my girls want to start a weekly art therapy session," Adeline added. "The veterans offered to do security upgrades," Dad said. "Free of charge." I stood back, watching them plan and organise, no one asking me for money or solutions. Sierra appeared beside me, camera in hand. She'd been documenting the day. "Still think this was about revenge?" she asked quietly. Before I could answer, a commotion at the door drew our attention. Maria, the woman Christine had mentioned, stood there with her children, their eyes wide at the transformed space. "Welcome home," Christine said warmly, leading them in. The youngest child, a girl about 6, ran straight to the reading nook. "Mommy, look, books!" Maria burst into tears. Christine hugged her while Adeline entertained the other children, showing them the mural's hidden words. Theo and Dad started explaining the new storage systems, designed specifically for families starting over. "No," I finally answered Sierra. "This was never about revenge, this was about breaking patterns. Look at them, really look." Christine, once so focused on appearances, comforting a woman in worn clothes and unwashed hair. Theo, who gambled away thousands, now proudly showing off budget-conscious designs. Adeline, teaching young girls to see their natural beauty. Dad, serving others instead of demanding service. "Your mum would have loved this," Sierra said, snapping another photo. "She did love this," I replied. "She tried to show us all along. We just weren't ready to see it." My phone buzzed. A message from Barrett. "Permits came through for the shelter's kitchen renovation. Ready when you are." I looked at my family, all engaged in their tasks, all finding their own ways to help. No one had asked me to fund the kitchen renovation. No one had demanded I fix everything. "Tell them we'll start planning next week," I typed back. "The whole family wants to help." Because that's what we'd become. Finally, truly, a family. Not bound by obligation or money, but by the simple act of helping others, and in doing so, helping ourselves. "Hey, Zara," Adeline called out. "Stop standing around and come help us organize these art supplies." I smiled and joined them, just one more pair of hands in a room full of people learning to give instead of take. The 6-month mark arrived faster than any of us expected. Barrett called a meeting at his office to discuss the completion of their volunteer requirements, but my family had other plans. "We want to meet at the shelter instead," Christine informed me. "There's something you need to see." I arrived to find not just my immediate family, but a crowd of familiar and new faces. Maria and her children, the teenage artists, veterans from Dad's Centre, people from Theo's support group, all mingling in the shelter's newly renovated community room. "Surprise!" Adeline called out, pulling me inside. "We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I asked, taking in the decorations and food spread. 6 months of transformation, Christine said, appearing with a folder. "And we have something to show you." She opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are the shelter's statistics since we started volunteering. Successful job placements up 40%, housing placements up 50%. Theo stepped forward with his own documentation. 12 of my group members have been gambling free for 3 months or more. We've started a financial literacy program. My girls, Adeline beamed, gesturing to the teenagers who are now setting up an art display, are all passing their classes. 3 got college acceptance letters last week. Dad cleared his throat. The Veterans Centre has doubled its volunteer base. We're opening a new wing next month. What are you all saying? I asked, though I already knew. We're saying we're not stopping, Christine declared. Papers or no papers, inheritance or no inheritance, we're committed now. You can't make us quit, Theo added with a grin. We're officially addicted to helping people. Speaking of addiction, a man stepped forward, one of Theo's group members. Your brother saved my life. Literally. I was contemplating suicide when he talked me down, showed me there was hope. Maria hugged Christine. I start my management training next week. My kids are in school, we have our own apartment, and it's all because she believed in me. One of Adeline's teens spoke up. I haven't used a filter on my photos in 2 months. I like my real face now. A veteran patted Dad's shoulder. This guy reminded us we still have value. We're not forgotten soldiers anymore. I felt tears welling up as more people stepped forward, each with a story about how my family had impacted their lives. But here's the real kicker, Christine said, pulling out one final document. We've started a foundation. All of us together. The paperwork just came through. A foundation? I whispered. The Whitney Family Foundation for Community Empowerment, Theo announced proudly. We're pooling our resources, not just money, but skills, connections, time. And guess what? Adeline added. We've already received our first major donation. From Emery's company. Barrett stepped forward, more papers in hand. So, about that inheritance. Keep it, Christine interrupted. All of it. Add it to the foundation's funds. Are you sure? I asked, looking at each of them. That's a lot of money. Money we didn't earn, Dad said firmly. Money we don't need anymore. We've found something better. Besides, Theo laughed, we're all making our own money now. Christine's starting a job placement program. I'm consulting for financial literacy projects. Adeline's got her youth mentoring certification. And I'm teaching veterans how to start small businesses, Dad finished. Turns out retirement was boring anyway. Sierra, who had been quietly filming everything, spoke up. So, Zara, still think your hospital bed scheme was too harsh? I looked around the room, at my family, at the lives they'd touched, at the community they'd built. I thought I was teaching them a lesson about money. They taught me one about purpose instead. You gave us a gift, Christine said, hugging me. A kick in the pants we desperately needed. The best kind of revenge, Theo added, is watching people become better than you ever imagined they could be. Even if we hated you a little bit at first, Adeline admitted. A lot at first, Dad corrected, pulling me into a bear hug. But that's what good parents do, isn't it? Push their children to be better. You did for us what your mother would have done. The celebration continued around us, people sharing stories, making plans, building connections. My family moved through the crowd with confidence and purpose, no longer seeking validation through money or status. So, Barrett said quietly, holding up the inheritance papers, what should I do with these? I watched Christine comforting a new shelter resident, Theo mentoring a young man about budgeting, Adeline leading an impromptu self-esteem workshop, and Dad sharing war stories with his veterans. Shred them, I said. They don't need my money anymore. They've found their own wealth. The autumn breeze carried the sound of laughter from the shelter's courtyard, where Dad and his veterans were setting up tables for the foundation's first official fundraising gala. Christine darted around with her clipboard, directing caterers and volunteers with the same intensity she once reserved for shopping sprees. The mayor's confirmed, she announced, pausing beside me, and 3 city council members. Remember when you used to get this excited about sample sales? I teased. She rolled her eyes. Don't remind me. Maria's handling the guest list, by the way. She's amazing at organisation. Speaking of amazing, Theo called out, jogging over with his phone, the online donations just hit 6 figures. The gaming tournament was a huge success. Inside, Adeline and her girls were putting final touches on an art installation, photographs and stories of lives transformed through the foundation's work. No filters, no pretense, just raw humanity. Look who clean up nice, Sierra said, filming as the teens emerged from the shelter's new career closet in professional attire. They'd be serving as hosts tonight, sharing their stories with potential donors. My daughter got her first job interview tomorrow, Maria told me proudly, adjusting one girl's blazer. Christine's been coaching her. The shelter director pulled me aside, tears in her eyes. When your family first started volunteering, I thought it was just rich people doing community service for show. I've never been happier to be wrong. Dad appeared, looking dapper in his suit. The veterans brought extra chairs, though I think they're really here for the food. Better than military rations, one of them shouted, making everyone laugh. Barrett and Emery arrived early, carrying boxes of promotional materials for the foundation. Wait until you see the video Sierra edited, Barrett said. There won't be a dry eye in the house. As evening fell and guests began arriving, I watched my family work the room. Christine introduced Maria to potential employers, her networking skills now serving a greater purpose. Theo shared success stories from his financial literacy program, while Adeline's teens proudly showed off their art and achievements. Dad stood with his veterans explaining their business mentorship program to impressed investors. These men and women sacrificed everything for our country, he said. The least we can do is help them rebuild their lives. Quite a change from the family that used to beg you for money, Sierra observed, capturing everything on camera. Before I could respond, the mayor stepped up to the microphone. I've seen many community initiatives in my career, but the Whitney Family Foundation is unique. It's not just about throwing money at problems. It's about personal investment, about transformation from within. Christine took the stage next. 6 months ago, my sister Zara taught us a hard lesson about privilege and responsibility. She forced us to confront our own failures and find purpose beyond wealth. Tonight, we're not asking for handouts. We're offering partnership in changing lives. Theo followed with statistics about their impact. Jobs created, homes secured, addictions overcome. Adeline's girls shared their journeys from insecurity to confidence. Dad introduced veterans who'd started successful businesses. None of this would have happened, Christine concluded, if our sister hadn't had the courage to push us off our pedestals. We thought she was punishing us. Instead, she gave us the greatest gift possible, the chance to become better people. The applause was thunderous, donations poured in. But what moved me most was watching my family throughout the evening. Christine mentoring Maria's daughter, Theo counseling a young man about gambling temptation, Adeline encouraging a shy teen to share her artwork, Dad proudly introducing his veterans to business contacts. As the event wound down, we gathered in the playroom we'd renovated together, the place where our transformation had really begun. Remember when we thought this was just about inheritance? Theo laughed. Remember when we hated Zara for manipulating us? Adeline added. Remember when we thought money was the only way to measure success? Christine mused. Dad pulled me into a hug. Remember when I said your mother would be ashamed? I was wrong. She's probably up there right now saying, I told you so. Sierra lowered her camera. So was it worth it? The hospital stay, the tough love, the risk of losing your family? I looked around the room, at Christine and Maria planning their next job fair, at Theo teaching budgeting to shelter residents, at Adeline removing the last traces of her Instagram influencer life, at Dad finally being the leader he was meant to be. I didn't lose my family, I said. I found them. We all did. Because sometimes the greatest act of love isn't giving people what they want, it's giving them what they need to become who they're meant to be. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is watching that transformation unfold, one changed life at a time.
My name's Sarah, and if you're expecting a fairy tale, you might want to look elsewhere. My life's been anything but. By now, I'm a microsurgeon, got a decent house, and you could say I've done all right for myself. But let me take you back to where it all started, back when life was anything but easy. I was just 8 when my dad passed away. He was the one person who made me feel like I was worth something. After he was gone, my mom, Ellen, didn't waste any time finding a new man. Mark, my stepdad, looked at me like I was a piece of gum stuck to his shoe from day one. Mark never laid a hand on me, but man, did he have a way with words. It was like he had a talent for making me feel like I was just taking up space. My mom? She might as well have been a ghost for all the defending she did. Can't you do anything right? Mark would bark at me for just about anything, laughing too loud, forgetting the dishes, you name it. It was like I was living with a ticking time bomb, never knowing what would. And then, when Mom got pregnant again and had my little sister, Emily, things went from bad to worse. I was thrilled to have a sister, don't get me wrong, but Mark saw it as the final nail in my coffin. We've got our own kid now. We don't need to be wasting resources on her, he told Mom, like I wasn't even there. You're just too much, Sarah. Always making a mess, always in the way, he'd complain. My own mother just nodded along, as if agreeing that I was nothing but a problem. One time, I tore my pants playing outside, a normal kid thing, right? But not in Mark's eyes. Look at her, just can't keep herself out of trouble. Tearing clothes now, what's next? Ellen, she's your daughter, but she's a disaster. Mom's response? Mark's right, Sarah. You need to be more careful. We can't afford to keep replacing your clothes. It felt like every little thing I did was under a microscope, every mistake blown up to be some kind of major catastrophe. My laughter, my tears, even just being me, it was all too much for them, or so they made it seem. Even as a kid, I got the message loud and clear. I was the outsider, the one who didn't fit into this picture-perfect family Mark and Mom were trying to paint. And with every passing day, that feeling of being superfluous, of being an unwanted extra, just kept growing. After the whole debacle with Mark and Mom, I found myself landing at Aunt Linda's doorstep. Think of it as going from the frying pan into the fire. Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, had this vibe like she'd chew you up and spit you out for breakfast without a second thought. Great, another mouth to feed, she grumbled the day I showed up with my suitcase, a little lost and a lot scared. Her house was the strict, no-nonsense zone where fun went to die. And me? I was about to become its newest inmate. The rules were simple: do as told, don't mess up, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get through the day without a lecture. Fat chance of that happening with me being, well, me. "Can't you do anything right, Sarah?" Aunt Linda's favorite greeting, usually after I'd done something like leaving a light on or not making my bed so you could bounce a quarter off it. One day, I forgot to take the trash out, a mortal sin in Linda's house. "You're just as useless as your mother said. Can't even remember a simple task," she barked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I'm sorry, Aunt Linda. It won't happen again," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. Apologies were like fuel to her fire, though. "Sorry doesn't cut it, girl. You live under my roof, you follow my rules. Got it? Or is that too complicated for you to understand?" Her words were like daggers, each one hitting its mark. It wasn't all bad, though. Some days, when I managed to stay under the radar, I'd find a quiet corner and lose myself in books, my escape from the constant criticism. But even that was a gamble. Reading again? That's not going to get you anywhere. You need to learn to do something useful. Linda would scoff, as if reading was a crime. The worst part wasn't the chores or the strict rules, it was the loneliness. I missed my sister, Emily, and even though Mom and Mark were no saints, there was a part of me that longed for something familiar, something like home. But Aunt Linda's place? It felt more like a prison. One evening, I tried to cook dinner, a peace offering of sorts. I was no chef, but I figured spaghetti couldn't be too hard. Boy, was I wrong. The sauce ended up everywhere but in the pot, a literal hot mess. Linda walked in, and her face went from 0 to furious in a second. "What in the world do you think you're doing? This kitchen is a disaster." I wanted to help. "To make dinner," I mumbled, my attempt at being helpful turning into yet another failure. "Help? You call this helping? You've just made more work for me. Don't ever try this again. You're more trouble than you're worth," she snapped, her words stinging like salt in a wound. That night, I cried myself to sleep, not for the first time since landing in her care. It was clear I was nothing but a burden to her, just like I had been to Mom and Mark. The message was loud and clear: I didn't belong anywhere. The worst part wasn't the constant chores or the never-ending criticism, it was the way she made me feel about myself. "You're just worthless, you know that? No wonder your mom dumped you here. She's probably relieved to be rid of you," she'd hiss whenever I dared to talk back or question her. Deep down, I clung to this naive hope that my mom would realize she missed me, that she'd come back for me. I used to imagine her showing up at Linda's doorstep, apologizing for everything and taking me back home. I believed, foolishly, that she still loved me, that maybe she was just too caught up with my stepdad and sister to reach out. One day, desperation got the better of me. I snuck into Aunt Linda's room and grabbed her phone, my heart racing as I dialed my mom's number. The phone rang, and for a moment, I held my breath, hoping for, I don't know, a miracle? "Hello?" Mom's voice came through, unfamiliar and distant. "Mom, it's me, Sarah. I miss you," I stammered, tears choking my words. There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence that felt like an eternity. Then, "Sarah, you shouldn't have called. Don't call me again. You don't need me." The line went dead. So did something inside me. That call shattered any illusion of love or care from her. I was truly alone. Aunt Linda found out, of course. She always found out everything. "You little thief. How dare you use my phone without permission?" she raged, her face twisted in anger. The punishment that followed was harsh, more for the betrayal she felt than the act itself. That night, as I lay in my bed, nursing my bruises, both physical and emotional, a hard truth settled in. My mom didn't love me. she never would. And Aunt Linda's words echoed in my mind, a cruel mantra that seemed to confirm my worst fears. No one needs you. After the whole debacle with Aunt Linda, I found myself standing on the doorstep of Grandma Judy's house, my bags feeling like they were filled with rocks instead of clothes. I wasn't sure what to expect. My memories of Grandma were fuzzy at best, and Aunt Linda's parting words, "Good luck with her, you'll need it," weren't exactly comforting. Grandma Judy opened the door, and there she was, a stern look on her face that didn't exactly scream welcome home. "So, you're here," she said, her voice as cold as I remembered Aunt Linda's heart. "Come in, then. We've got rules in this house. You'll follow them." The first few weeks were rough. I kept to myself, trying not to step on any landmines. Grandma was tough, her words sharp as knives. Every mistake I made, she was there, pointing it out. "Can't you do anything right? Your mother really didn't teach you much, did she?" she'd snap. But something strange happened as the days turned into weeks. I started to see cracks in Grandma's tough exterior. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table struggling with some math homework, she sat down beside me, her tone less harsh than usual. "Let me see that," she said, taking the pencil from my hand. Math was always my strong suit. It was the first time we'd done anything together that didn't involve a lecture. And as we worked through the problems, I caught her smiling at me, a genuine smile that I hadn't seen from any family member in, well, ever. "Thanks, Grandma," I said, surprised at the warmth spreading through my chest. "Don't thank me yet. You've still got to pass that test," she replied, but the edge in her voice was gone. Days turned into months, and those months into a year. Grandma and we found a rhythm. She taught me how to cook, telling me stories about my mom as a child, stories I clung to because they made me feel closer to the woman who'd left me behind. "Your mom was a wild one, always getting into trouble. You've got her spirit," Grandma said one day, a hint of pride in her voice. It was during one of our cooking lessons that I finally opened up about how much it hurt, being abandoned by Mom. Grandma listened, really listened, and when I was done, she wrapped me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "Your mom, she made her choices, but they're not on you. You're strong, stronger than you realize. And you're wanted, here, with me." That was the turning point. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Grandma wasn't just a relative, she was becoming my family, the kind you choose, not the kind you're born into. One evening, out of the blue, Grandma said, "I've been thinking. How would you feel about making this official? You know, adoption." I was speechless. The thought of belonging, really belonging to someone again, filled me with a mix of hope and disbelief. "You mean it?" I asked, barely daring to believe it. "I've never been more serious about anything," Grandma replied, her gaze steady on mine. "I want you to be in every sense of the word." Turning my life around wasn't easy, but with Grandma Judy's backing, I started to see a future for myself, one where I wasn't defined by my past. Medicine. That was the dream. It sounded crazy at first, even to me. I mean, going from feeling worthless to dreaming of becoming a microsurgeon? But Grandma, she believed in me, more than I ever believed in myself. "Medicine, huh?" Grandma raised an eyebrow the day I told her. "That's a tough road, Sarah. You sure you're up for it?" "Yeah, I am," I replied, more to convince myself than her. "I want to do something meaningful, you know? Help people." Grandma nodded, her expression softening. "Then you'll do it. And I'll be right here, cheering you on." Getting into medical college was my next big hurdle. The books, the late nights, the endless exams, it was like diving into an ocean without knowing how to swim. But every time I thought about quitting, I'd remember Grandma's words, her faith in me. That kept me going. One day, after I got my acceptance letter, Grandma and I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter lying between us like a trophy. "I knew you could do it," she said, her eyes misty. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma." I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat. None of that now. She brushed off the sentiment with a wave of her hand. You did the work, kid. You earned this. Medical school was a blur of sleepless nights, relentless studying, and the constant pressure to prove I belonged there. I made friends, sure, but I always felt like the odd one out, the girl who had clawed her way in from a world they knew nothing about. Hey, Sarah, you coming out with us tonight? A classmate, Jake, asked me one day. We're celebrating the end of exams. I hesitated, my mind on the mountain of study material waiting for me back at my dorm. I don't know, Jake. I've got so much to catch up on. Come on, everyone needs a break. Plus, you aced the exams. If anyone deserves to celebrate, it's you. Maybe he was right. For once, I decided to let go, to be just another medical student, not the girl with the chip on her shoulder. That night, I laughed and danced, feeling lighter than I had in years. But as medical school progressed, the challenges grew tougher. There were moments when I felt like I was in over my head, drowning in a sea of knowledge I could never fully grasp. One particularly tough day, after failing a simulation test, I called Grandma, fighting back tears. I don't know if I can do this, Grandma. It's just so hard. Sarah, her voice was stern, yet gentle, over the phone. You faced harder things in life than this. You're going to be an amazing doctor. Now, dry those tears and get back to it. You hear me? Her words were like a beacon in the storm. I dug my heels in, refusing to let this dream slip through my fingers. I studied harder, pushed myself further, and slowly, things started to click. The day I graduated, Grandma was there in the front row, her face beaming with pride. I told you, didn't I? My granddaughter, the doctor, she said, wrapping me in a hug that felt like home. Thanks, Grandma, I whispered, holding back tears. For believing in me when no one else did. Always, Sarah, always. Graduating from medical college was a milestone, sure, but it was the internship that really tested me. Long hours, tough cases, and always that pressure to prove I belonged there. But every time I felt like I was in over my head, I'd think back to what Grandma Judy had taught me about strength and perseverance. Remember, Sarah, it's not about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, she'd say, her voice a steady presence in my mind during those grueling nights at the hospital. Our conversations, whenever I managed to snatch some time away from the hospital, were my lifeline. We'd sit in her kitchen, sipping tea, and I'd share every detail of my day, every success, and every setback. She'd listen, really listen, and then offer her nuggets of wisdom. You're doing important work, Sarah. Healing others, that's a noble path, she'd say, her eyes twinkling with pride. And in those moments, I felt like I could do anything. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Just as I was settling into my role, feeling like I was finally contributing something meaningful, Grandma Judy passed away. It was sudden, a shock to my system that left me reeling. She was my rock, my family, and suddenly, she was gone. Organizing the funeral was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. I wanted it to be perfect, a fitting tribute to the incredible woman she was. But as I looked around the chapel, I realized something heartbreaking. There were no relatives there, no blood family. Just friends, colleagues, and the many lives Grandma Judy had touched. It was a stark reminder of how alone I truly was in that familial sense. Yet, as I stood there, delivering the eulogy, I felt a strange sense of strength. Grandma Judy had taught me well. She'd prepared me for this moment, not just to face the world without her, but to do so with grace and courage. After everything, it's just me now, I said, my voice steady, despite the tears threatening to fall. But I carry a piece of her with me, in every life I touch, in every decision I make. She was my family, my everything. And though she's gone, her legacy lives on through me. The silence of my apartment was a sanctuary, a rare moment of peace in my otherwise hectic life. That was until the knock came, sharp and insistent, echoing through the room like a foreboding omen. I hesitated, knowing instinctively that whatever lay on the other side of that door was not going to be good. My intuition didn't disappoint. Opening the door, I was met with the all-too-familiar faces of my past, Ellen, my mother, with her practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes, Mark, my stepfather, whose disdain for me was barely concealed beneath his surface-level politeness, and Emily, my half-sister, looking uncomfortable and out of place. Mom wasted no time. "Sarah, darling, we've missed you. It's been too long." Her voice was sugary, the falseness of her affection grating against my nerves. I chuckled. "Really? Because it feels just right to me." "What brings you here after all these years?" Mark intervened in the conversation. "Cut the crap, Ellen. We're not here for a family reunion. We're here about Judy's inheritance." The mention of Grandma Judy's name tightened my chest, a mix of grief and anger swirling within me. Mom couldn't stand it. "Sarah, we're here for our share. You know, of Judy's things. It's only fair," she declared, her voice a mix of entitlement and false sweetness. I couldn't help but scoff at her audacity. "Fair? You're talking to me about fair now? After 19 years of radio silence?" She bristled at that, her eyes narrowing. "Don't be ungrateful, Sarah. You've made a fortune for yourself, and now with Judy's inheritance. Well, it's only right you share." The laughter that burst from me was sharp, almost bitter. "Ungrateful? You've got some nerve. You left me, remember? I owe you nothing." Their audacity was astounding, their presence in my home a stark reminder of the pain they'd caused. Mom's face tightened, a mix of anger and something else, maybe shock. "You're rich now, a successful doctor. And Judy's inheritance. You must give us our due, or we'll take this to court. We'll claim alimony." That's when I let the bomb drop. "Good luck with that. Judy adopted me. Legally, you're nothing to me now." The color drained from her face, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Mark's face darkened, his posture stiffening as he stepped closer, his voice a low growl. "You think you've won, huh? You'll regret this, Sarah. You haven't seen the last of us." But they didn't scare me. Not anymore. I've dealt with worse. "I'm not afraid of you. Now, please leave my apartment," I said, my voice steady. In the aftermath of my family's brazen demand for a share of Grandma Judy's inheritance, I foolishly believed that chapter of my life was closed. How wrong I was. Their audacity knew no bounds. They had taken up residence in Judy's house as if it were their ancestral right. The news came from Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor with a penchant for keeping an eye out, her voice tinged with worry over the phone. "Sarah, dear, I thought you should know, there are people living in your grandma's house. Didn't seem right not to tell you." Fueled by a mix of anger and a sense of duty to Judy's memory, I went to confront them. They were sprawled in the living room, making themselves at home in a place they had no right to be. "What the hell do you think you're doing here?" I demanded, my voice firm, trying to keep the bubbling anger at bay. Mark, ever the provocateur, lounged on the sofa with a smirk that made my blood boil. "Oh, look who decided to show up. We're just making ourselves comfortable, seeing as we're family and all," he retorted, his words dripping with unwarranted entitlement. Their audacity was astounding. "You're no family of mine. And you sure as hell don't belong here. This is my property, legally left to me by Grandma Judy. You need to leave. Now." I shot back, standing my ground against the man who had made my childhood a misery. Mom, with her skewed sense of reality, chimed in. "Don't be so dramatic, Sarah. We're just here for what's rightfully ours. Judy would have wanted it that way." Her attempt to manipulate Judy's wishes was transparent and pathetic. "You wouldn't know what Judy wanted. You weren't there for her, remember? You have no claim here, and if you don't leave, I'll have to involve the police," I warned them, my patience wearing thin. The threat seemed to hit home. Mark stood up, trying to use his height to intimidate me, but those tactics no longer worked on me. "You wouldn't dare," he bluffed, but his confidence was faltering. "Try me. You have until the end of the day. If you're not out by then, I'll have the authorities here so fast your heads will spin," I declared, the resolve in my voice unmistakable. They knew then that I was serious, that the scared little girl they once knew was gone, replaced by someone who wouldn't be bullied or intimidated. They left, their departure marked not by triumph, but by the realization that they had underestimated me. I watched them go, a sense of victory mixed with the exhaustion of dealing with their never-ending greed. In the days following the showdown, a semblance of peace had begun to settle over me. But that tranquility was shattered by a call from Mrs. Henderson. "Sarah, dear, you need to come over. Someone's gone and broken the windows at your grandma's place." Rushing over, the sight that greeted me was a jarring reminder of the spite my family was capable of. "I bet it was Mark," I muttered under my breath, my suspicions voiced aloud without proof to back them. Mrs. Henderson, ever the watchful guardian of our street, chimed in with a revelation that sparked a flicker of hope amidst the anger. "You know, I've got those cameras installed. They point right over here. Maybe we caught who did it." Together, we pored over the footage, the grainy images flickering on the screen until the unmistakable figure of my stepfather appeared, stones in hand, malice in his actions. Armed with the evidence, my next call was to the police. I explained the situation, my voice steady, the evidence clear. "I have video proof of my stepfather vandalizing the property. He's caused significant damage." The officer on the line was sympathetic, promising swift action. "We'll handle it from here, ma'am. We've got enough to bring him in." True to their word, the police acted, and Mark was detained, the reality of his actions catching up with him at last. The threat of legal repercussions loomed large, and faced with the prospect of arrest, my mother and stepfather did the only thing they seemed capable of when confronted with the consequences of their actions: they disappeared. In the aftermath, the silence that settled over Grandma Judy's house was different. It was not the oppressive silence of abandonment, but the peaceful quiet of resolution. The broken windows would be repaired, not just as a physical mending, but as a symbol of my own healing from the years of neglect and manipulation. I'm Amber. My life got flipped upside down when I was just 10. We were living in a rented house back then, me, my mom, and my dad, Tom. Dreams of a home we could call our own were often dinner table talk, but that was before everything went south. Then, it happened. My mom passed away. It was like our family's heart got ripped out, but it seemed like Dad's heart healed way too fast. Enter Sarah, the new woman in Dad's life. She moved in, bringing a storm with her. From day one, Sarah made it clear I wasn't part of her plan. "Dad, why does Sarah always mess with my stuff?" I asked one evening, trying to keep my voice steady. My clothes had been accidentally bleached, and my favorite dishes seemed to taste way too salty lately. "Amber, you gotta stop this nonsense." Dad's voice was harsh, a tone I wasn't used to before Sarah came into the picture. "Sarah's trying her best. You're imagining things." "But I'm not." I protested, but Dad's look told me to drop it. It was the same every time. My words against hers, and hers were the only ones he seemed to hear. Sarah had this way about her, making it look like she was the victim, always. "I don't know what you're talking about, Amber. Maybe you're just not used to someone else being in the house," she'd say with a fake concern that didn't fool me. But it sure fooled Dad. "I'm telling you, she's doing it on purpose." I'd cry out, but Dad wouldn't have any of it. "Enough, Amber. I won't hear another bad word against Sarah. You understand? You're the one causing trouble here. Keep it up, and there'll be consequences." He'd snap back, his patience with me wearing thin. It was like talking to a brick wall, only the brick wall used to tuck me in at night and read me stories. Things got so bad I thought about talking to Grandma about it, but I chickened out. She loved Dad so much, and telling her how he was acting now how he was choosing Sarah over me, it'd break her heart. So, I kept it all inside, hoping maybe it'd get better, that Dad would see through Sarah's act. But it never happened. Sarah's little accidents became my daily dread. Clothes ruined, food spoiled, and the smallest of my complaints turned into World War III at home. "Dad, my jeans are ruined, look." I showed him one day, holding up a pair of jeans that looked like they'd had a one-on-one with a bottle of bleach. "Looks like you're not taking care of your things, Amber. Maybe if you were more responsible, these things wouldn't happen." Dad dismissed it like it was nothing, Sarah smirking over his shoulder. It was a losing battle, talking to him. My words bounced off him like they were nothing. It hurt, you know? Realizing that the superhero dad I grew up admiring was now firmly on the villain's side. My complaints, my feelings, they meant nothing to him anymore. Sarah had twisted our world around her finger, and I was the only one who seemed to see it. That's how it began, the story of my shattered family. A tale of loss, not just of my mom, but of the father I thought I knew. It's a story I never thought I'd have to tell, but here we are. And trust me, it's only the beginning. Living with Dad and Sarah was like being stuck in a never-ending nightmare. From the moment Sarah stepped into our lives, things took a turn for the worse. But it wasn't just the constant belittling and sabotage that got to me, it was Dad's blind loyalty to her, no matter what. I learned pretty quickly that complaining to Dad was about as useful as talking to a brick wall. Every time I brought up Sarah's antics, he'd brush it off like it was nothing, or worse, accuse me of making things up. "Stop trying to cause trouble, Amber," he'd snap, his voice like ice. So, I learned to keep my mouth shut and bear the brunt of Sarah's cruelty alone. But it wasn't easy, not when every day felt like a battle just to survive in my own home. The only reprieve came when Grandma came to visit. She lived in another city, so her visits were rare, but cherished. Whenever she was around, Sarah turned into a whole different person. Suddenly, she was all smiles, cooking up a storm and dressing me in the fanciest clothes, like I was some kind of princess. It made my stomach churn, seeing her act all sweet when I knew the truth. "Isn't Sarah just the sweetest thing?" Grandma would coo, her eyes sparkling with affection. I'd force a smile, nodding along even though I felt sick to my stomach. "Yeah, she's something all right," I'd mumble, trying to ignore the knot of resentment building in my chest. But behind Grandma's back, Sarah was a whole different story. She'd go from sugar sweet to ice cold in the blink of an eye, her words like daggers aimed straight at my heart. And Dad? He was none the wiser, too blinded by Sarah's charms to see the truth. "Here, Tom, I brought some money for Amber," Grandma would say, handing Dad an envelope stuffed with cash. But guess who never saw a penny of it? That's right, yours truly. Dad and Sarah would pocket the money faster than you could say greedy, spending it on themselves, while I scraped by with whatever scraps they threw my way. And Sarah's cruelty only got worse with time. When Dad wasn't looking, she'd lay into me, leaving bruises hidden under long sleeves and forced smiles. I became an expert at covering up the evidence, hiding the marks with clothes and makeup like it was second nature. "Why do you always wear long sleeves, Amber?" Dad asked one day, eyeing me suspiciously over the breakfast table. "Just like the look, Dad." I lied through my teeth, praying he'd buy it. He grunted in response, turning back to his newspaper without another word. But I could feel the weight of his disappointment like a lead balloon in the pit of my stomach. The days dragged on like a slow-motion train wreck, each one worse than the last. Sarah's cruel jabs and Dad's blind eye left me feeling like I was drowning in a sea of despair. But little did I know, the turning point was lurking just around the corner, ready to shake things up in ways I never imagined. It was a scorching afternoon, the kind where even the air felt heavy with heat. I sat in my desk at school, trying to focus on the lesson while hiding the bruises Sarah had left on my arms. But Mrs. Thompson wasn't one to let things slide. "Amber, why are you wearing long sleeves in this heat?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, scrambling for an excuse. I got cold last night," I mumbled, hoping she wouldn't press the issue. But Mrs. Thompson wasn't buying it, not for a second. Amber, I can see the bruises. You can't keep covering for whoever's hurting you. You need to speak up. My heart hammered in my chest as I searched for a response. But before I could say anything, Mrs. Thompson was already picking up the phone, dialing Dad's number with a determined look in her eye. The tension in the room was palpable as Mrs. Thompson explained the situation to Dad, her voice firm and unwavering. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. And then, like a whirlwind, Dad stormed into the school, his face twisted with anger. "What the hell is going on, Amber?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the hallway. I tried to explain, to make him see the truth, but he wouldn't listen. Instead, he grabbed me roughly by the arm and dragged me out of the school, his grip like a vice. We drove home in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. When we finally arrived, Sarah was waiting for us, her expression a mix of curiosity and disdain. Well, what do we have here?" she sneered, her eyes flicking over me with disdain. Dad didn't waste any time. He launched into a tirade, accusing me of embarrassing him and making up lies about our family. I tried to defend myself, to make him understand, but it was like talking to a brick wall. "You're a disgrace, Amber," he spat, his words like a slap in the face. Alone in my room, tears streaming down my cheeks, I realized something. I couldn't rely on them anymore. I had to stand up for myself, to find the strength to break free from their toxic grasp. After a few hours of me being locked away in my room, Dad came knocking, his tone unusually calm but still laced with a cold sternness. "Amber, we need to talk. Now." I hesitated but knew better than to keep him waiting. Dragging myself out of bed, I found Sarah and Dad sitting at the dining table, their expressions stern and unwelcoming. "Sit down," Dad commanded, pointing to the empty chair opposite them. I obeyed, my heart sinking as I prepared myself for whatever was coming next. Dad cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on me like I was some sort of defendant in court. "Your stepmom and I have been talking. We're sick and tired of your stories and accusations. It's got to stop, Amber." Sarah chimed in, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We only want what's best for you, dear. But spreading lies and trying to tear this family apart is not the way." Dad's voice hardened. "If you keep this up, telling these tall tales about Sarah, there's only one way this is going to end. We'll have no choice but to send you away. To an orphanage." The word hit me like a ton of bricks. Orphanage? Were they serious? My own family sending me away because I was a problem? "Think about your behavior, Amber. This is your last warning," Dad added before dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "Go to your room." Stunned and defeated, I retreated back to my room, their words echoing in my mind. The threat of being sent away was terrifying, yet it also ignited something in me, a determination not to let them break me, no matter what. The echo of my heart pounding was the only sound filling my ears as I dialed Grandma's number. The phone felt slippery in my sweat-dampened palms, a lifeline in the midst of the storm that had become my life. When she answered, her voice was like a beacon in the darkness. "Grandma, it's me, Amber," I stammered out, trying to keep my voice steady. I need your help." "What's wrong, dear?" Her voice was laced with concern, cutting through the fear that had wrapped itself around me. Through choked sobs, I laid bare the truth of my existence under Dad and Sarah's roof. The hidden bruises, the whispered threats, their plan to discard me like an unwanted toy to an orphanage. Grandma's response was swift and decisive. "Stay put, Amber. I'm on my way." Hours later, she was at our door, her presence commanding the room like a storm. Dad tried to block her path, puffing up in a display of authority he hadn't earned. "You can't just take her, Mom. I'm her father, for God's sake." Grandma's gaze was steely, unflinching. "And you've failed her, Tom. I won't let you destroy her life." Sarah, ever the snake, tried to slither in with her venom. She's making it all up. It's all attention-seeking. I've seen the bruises, Sarah. Your act doesn't fool me, Grandma countered with a glare that could freeze hell over. The journey to Grandma's house was silent, a shared quiet that spoke volumes. The relief of escaping that house was a balm to my soul, yet fear of what lay ahead gnawed at the edges of my newfound freedom. Grandma's home was a stark contrast to the coldness I had come to associate with family. Warmth enveloped me, not just from the crackling fireplace, but from the love that seemed to permeate every inch of the space. Amber, you're safe here. You always will be, Grandma said as she handed me a cup of tea, her eyes softening. I don't know how to thank you, I whispered, the warmth of the cup seeping into my hands. Just be yourself, dear. That's all I've ever wanted for you. Days turned into weeks, and Grandma's house became a sanctuary. She became my mentor, teaching me life skills that were about more than just surviving, they were about thriving. We explored the world together, visiting places I had only dreamed of. Each trip was an adventure, a chance to see the world through eyes unclouded by pain. On my 16th birthday, Grandma handed me a beautifully wrapped package. Inside was a professional camera, sleek and powerful. Your eyes see the world in a unique way, Amber. Capture it, share it, live it. Photography wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifeline. It gave me purpose, a sense of identity that I had lost in the shadows of my past. Look at this, Grandma, I'd say, showing her the photos I had taken. Each image was a piece of my soul, a step on the journey of healing. You have a gift, Amber. Never let it go, she'd reply, her pride in me shining brighter than any camera flash. I had spent so long under Grandma's care that I had all but forgotten about the existence of my father and stepmother. They had never bothered to call me, check up on me, or even acknowledge my birthday or holidays. And truth be told, I didn't miss them one bit. Grandma was all I needed, her love and support sustaining me through even the darkest of times. But just when I thought things were finally looking up, fate had other plans in store. It was a crisp autumn morning when Grandma took ill. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a common cold, but as the days wore on, her condition worsened. The once vibrant woman I knew was reduced to a shadow of her former self, her laughter replaced by labored breaths and pain-filled eyes. I did everything I could to help her, fetching medicine, cooking her favorite meals, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. The inevitable was drawing closer with each passing day, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. One evening, as I sat by her bedside, holding her frail hand in mine, she turned to me with a look of sadness in her eyes. Amber, there's something I need to tell you, she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. I leaned in closer, my heart pounding in my chest. What is it, Grandma? You can tell me anything. She took a shaky breath, her grip on my hand tightening. I'm not going to be around much longer, dear. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You've grown into such a strong, independent woman, and I know you're going to do great things. Tears welled up in my eyes as I squeezed her hand tighter. I don't know what I'm going to do without you, Grandma. You've always been there for me, through thick and thin. She smiled weakly, her eyes brimming with love. You'll always have me in your heart, Amber. And remember, you're never alone as long as you have the memories we've shared. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the steady rhythm of Grandma's breathing, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss creeping over me. She had been my anchor in a sea of uncertainty, and now I was adrift once again, left to navigate the stormy waters of life on my own. The loss of Grandma left a gaping void in my heart, a chasm of grief that threatened to swallow me whole. Her absence echoed through the halls of her house, haunting me with memories of happier times. But amidst the sorrow, a sense of determination burned within me like a smoldering ember, urging me to take control of my own destiny. As I stood by Grandma's graveside, surrounded by wilted flowers and tear-stained faces, I couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief that Dad and Sarah had the audacity to show up. Their presence was like salt in an open wound, a painful reminder of the fractured relationship we shared. Sarah's words cut through the somber silence like a knife, her tone dripping with venom as she demanded I vacate Grandma's house. My jaw clenched with anger, but beneath the rage, there was a flicker of amusement. Did they really think they could just waltz in and claim what was rightfully mine? A bitter laugh escaped my lips, drawing puzzled glances from Dad and Sarah. You two really are something else, I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. You think you can just kick me out of Grandma's house and take everything for yourselves? Dad's eyes narrowed, his fists clenching at his sides. It's not like that, Amber. We just want what's best for you. What's best for me? I scoffed, incredulous. You mean what's best for you? Sarah's face twisted with indignation, but before she could retort, I delivered the final blow. You know what's funny? Grandma saw right through you too. That's why she left the house and $500,000 to me. But the drama didn't end there. Dad's initial shock turned to joy. He began shouting about how, as my guardian, he would control my inheritance. Sarah's eyes gleamed with anticipation as she talked about how they'd spend my money. I couldn't help but laugh at their ignorance. You two really are clueless, I said, shaking my head. You think you can control me? Well, guess what? I turned 18 a month ago. I'm in charge now, and you're not getting a penny. The color drained from their faces as the reality of their situation dawned on them. Dad's attempts to regain control were feeble at best, his protests falling on deaf ears as I stood my ground. You can't do this to us, Amber, Dad pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. I met his gaze with steely resolve. I'm not doing anything to you, Dad. You did this to yourselves. And with that, I showed them the door, cutting ties with them once and for all. As they slunk away, defeated, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. For the first time in my life, I was truly free, free from their manipulation, free from their cruelty, free to live my life on my own terms. The house felt empty, but it was a good kind of emptiness, like a blank canvas ready for a new painting. I knew I had a lot of work ahead of me, but for the first time, I felt like I was truly in control of my life. I decided to start fresh, to renovate the house and make it my own. The first order of business was to clear out all the old furniture and repaint the walls. I called up a friend, Jamie, who was handy with renovations. Hey, Jamie, you busy this weekend? I asked when she picked up the phone. Depends, what's up? Jamie replied, her interest piqued. I'm redoing the house. Need some help painting and moving stuff. Plus, I could really use the company, I said, hoping she'd say yes. You had me at redoing the house. I'm in. Need to escape my own chaos here, Jamie said with a laugh. Jamie came over the next day, armed with paintbrushes, rollers, and a playlist that could keep us motivated for hours. We started in the living room, deciding on a bright, cheerful color to replace the dull beige that had been there for years. As we painted, Jamie turned to me, a mischievous glint in her eye. So, this house is all yours now, huh? Planning any wild parties? I laughed, dipping my roller back into the paint. Wild parties? With my two friends? Please, we'd be asleep by 10. Speak for yourself. I'm a party animal, Jamie protested, flicking a bit of paint my way. The day turned into evening, and before we knew it, the room had transformed. The new color made the space feel warm and inviting, a reflection of the new start I was craving. The following weeks were a blur of activity. I fixed up the kitchen, updated the bathroom, and even started a small garden in the backyard. The house began to feel like a home, a place where I could heal and grow. One evening, as I sat on the newly installed deck, admiring the sunset, my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, called out from over the fence. Place is looking good, Amber. You've been working hard. Thanks, Mr. Henderson. It's been a lot of work, but it's worth it, I replied, grateful for the acknowledgement. Need any help with that garden? Got some tomato plants that need a home, he offered, his voice friendly and warm. I'd love that, thank you, I said, touched by his kindness. It felt good to be part of a community, to connect with people who genuinely cared. As the days passed, I threw myself into making the house my sanctuary. I hung photos of my adventures with Grandma, filled bookshelves with my favorite novels, and turned one of the spare rooms into a photography studio. My passion for photography, sparked by the camera Grandma had given me, had grown into a full-blown hobby. One afternoon, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a collection of Grandma's journals. Curious, I opened one and began to read. Her words were a window into her soul, full of wisdom, love, and a touch of sass. I realized then that, even in her absence, Grandma was still guiding me, still a part of my journey. It's been a whole decade since I've turned the page on what was a pretty rocky chapter of my life. At 28, things are looking up. I'm killing it as a lawyer in one of those high-flying firms, cruising around in a car that's as sleek as they come, surrounded by a squad of mates who are more like family, and yeah, there's this guy I'm seeing. Life in Grandma's old place has been nothing short of a blessing. Then, out of nowhere, my dad rings up. Haven't heard a peep from him in 10 years, and suddenly, here he is, popping up like a bad penny. Hey, Amber, it's me. He starts, his voice all shaky. I need your help. I'm like, who is this again, knowing full well who's on the other end. It's your dad. Listen, me and Sarah, we're in deep. Debt's up to our eyeballs. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. I need money, kiddo. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter even to my own ears. My dad, you say? Funny, I don't recall having a father. Especially not one who'd dump his kid and then show up a decade later with his hand out. He tries to cut in, but I'm not having any of it. No, you listen. You remember how you and your wife treated me? Threw me out like I was nothing when Grandma passed? You made your bed, now, you get to lie in it. There's a desperate edge to his voice now. Please, I'm begging you. We got nowhere else to turn. That hit a nerve, not gonna lie. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all the nights I spent in that house, feeling like an outsider. The memory of their faces when they found out Grandma left everything to me, not a shred of concern for me, just greed. So, I laid it down for him, clear as day. Not my circus, not my monkeys. You were never there for me when I needed you. Now, you want my help? Forget it. I won't give you a cent. And with that, I hung up, the finality of the click echoing through the silent room. It was harsh, maybe, but so were the lessons I learned growing up. Life taught me you can't expect to harvest where you haven't sown. So, I picked myself up, went out to meet my boyfriend and friends for dinner, and didn't look back. Life's too short for regrets, especially about people who only remember you exist when they need something. So, here's the deal. I'm Emma. Just your average 26-year-old who crunches numbers for a living. Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales, but it pays the bills. Married to Jake, a guy who's managed to stick it out as a college teacher without losing his mind. He's 30, by the way. 4 years on me, but who's counting? We've got this cozy little setup, our own place, away from the world's drama. Or so I thought. Enter Laura, Jake's mom, a storm dressed like a Sunday morning. From day one, she made it clear I was about as welcome as a tax audit. First time I met her, she looked me up and down like I'd just crawled out of a bargain bin. So, you're the accountant, she said, voice dripping with something cold. Yes, ma'am, I replied, trying to keep it together. Interesting, she muttered, turning to Jake. I always thought you'd end up with someone more. That more hung in the air like bad perfume. I knew what she meant. Not fancy enough. My parents aren't exactly headline material, just hardworking folks. But Laura, oh, she expected her son to snag a princess, I guess. And there I was, Cinderella without the fairy godmother. Jake, bless him, didn't see it. Or chose not to. Mom's just old-fashioned, he'd say, brushing it off. But every visit, every family dinner, Laura's jabs got sharper. Remember Julia? Your ex? A lawyer, wasn't she? Such a shame you two didn't work out. I tried to laugh it off, focus on the good stuff. Like how Jake and I were building our own little world, job stability, a house, planning for a future together. But Laura's words, man, they stick to you like gum on your shoe. One day, we're over at their place for dinner. Laura's laying it on thick, praising Jake's accomplishments, how he's a shining beacon for the family. Then, with a smile that could freeze hell over, she turns to me. And Emma, still playing with numbers, I see. How quaint. Jake finally piped up, Mom, come on. Emma's doing great at her job. But Laura just waved him off. Yes, yes, of course. We must all do what we can, I suppose. It was like living in a sitcom where you're the only one not in on the joke. Jake kept telling me to ignore her, that it didn't matter what she thought. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one getting the verbal side-eye every time we crossed the threshold. I started dreading those visits, the tension, the backhanded compliments. It was like walking into a minefield, blindfolded. But I sucked it up, for Jake. Love makes you do funny things, like tolerate a woman who wishes you were anyone but who you are. So, that's the scoop. Emma, the unsuitable bride, according to the queen bee herself. Living the dream, one snide remark at a time. But hey, at least it's our dream, right? And no high and mighty mother-in-law was going to take that away from me. Not without a fight, anyway. Life's got its own way of throwing curveballs, and mine came in the form of a peanut. Yeah, you heard that right. A tiny, inconspicuous peanut. Most folks don't think twice about munching on them, but for me, it's like playing Russian roulette. Found out the hard way when I was just a kid. A spoonful of peanut butter turned into an express trip to the ER. Since then, my life's been a never-ending game of what's in the food. Jake knows the drill. He's seen me whip out my allergy card at restaurants, interrogating waiters like I'm solving a crime. Does this have peanuts? What about cross-contamination? Some people get it, others look at me like I'm a diva making a fuss over nothing. Then there's Laura. First time we discussed my allergies, her eyes nearly rolled out of her skull. You're allergic to peanuts? She scoffed, like I'd just told her I was allergic to breathing. And soy, and peas, and what else? Air? Jake jumped in, bless him. Mom, it's serious. Emma could end up in the hospital. Laura waved it off. Oh, please. People eat peanuts every day. It's all in your head. I wanted to retort, but Jake squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea to let it go. I let it slide, thinking it was a one-off. But no, Laura had to make a show of it. Every dinner invite became a gamble. She'd parade dishes around, boasting about how she'd made everything Emma safe. But there was always this edge in her voice, a hint that she was humoring me, playing along with my little problem. One time, she served this fancy dessert, all proud and smiling. Made it myself. Absolutely no peanuts, she announced. I was wary, had to be. You sure, Laura? You know my allergies are no joke. She rolled her eyes, of course, I'm sure. What kind of monster do you take me for? That stung, but I went ahead, took a tiny bite, and bam, instant regret. My throat started itching, my skin flared up in red spots. Jake was on his feet in a second, panic written all over his face. Laura's reaction? Oh, must have been something else. You're always so dramatic. Dramatic? I was frantically fishing for my EpiPen, feeling like my throat was closing up. Jake was furious. This isn't a joke, Mom. Look at her. But Laura just stood there, a mix of shock and stubborn denial on her face. After that incident, Jake and I laid down the law. No more meals at Laura's if she couldn't take my allergies seriously. It was a whole thing. Jake arguing with his mom, me feeling like a burden, the whole 9 yards. But the kicker? Laura still acted like I was making it all up, like my allergies were a personal attack on her cooking or something. It's always something with Emma. I overheard her telling Jake one day. Can't eat this, can't eat that. How do you live like this? Jake, ever the peacekeeper, tried to explain it wasn't a choice, that my allergies were as real as it gets. But Laura, she just didn't want to hear it. Stubborn as a mule, that one. So yeah, peanuts. Who knew something so small could cause such a big ruckus? But here I am, living on the edge, one snack at a time. And Laura? She's still convinced I'm just being difficult. But hey, what's life without a little drama at the dinner table, right? Laura's visits to our place became more frequent than a bad sitcom rerun, each one with its own set of digs and jabs. It was like she had a checklist of ways to make me feel small, and she was ticking them off one by one. One afternoon, she dropped by unannounced, as was her style, catching me in the middle of my weekend relaxation mode, sweatpants, no makeup, and the house, well, lived in. Oh, Emma, she sighed, stepping over a pile of magazines I hadn't gotten around to sorting. I see we're still embracing the casual approach to housekeeping. I bit back a retort, counting to 10 in my head. Just enjoying my day off, Laura. Want some coffee? She waved off the offer, her nose wrinkling as if she'd just walked into a landfill. I'll pass. I doubt you have anything that hasn't expired. As I boiled water, out of spite more than anything, I couldn't help but feel the sting. You know, not everyone measures their worth by how clean their countertops are. Laura sked, eyeing the living room with disdain. It's not about worth, Emma. It's about taking pride in your home. But let's not pretend you'd understand that. The barbs were getting old, but what really got my goat was when she started in on more personal stuff. Stuff you don't just throw around in casual conversation. You know, Jake told me you two are trying for a baby, she began, her tone laced with something I couldn't quite place. Concern? Doubt? I just hope for your sake it doesn't inherit your propensity for health issues. I nearly dropped the kettle. Excuse me? Laura shrugged, a master of feigned innocence. Well, it's just that with your allergies and whatnot, it's a wonder you can function. Can't be too careful these days. The insinuation was crystal clear, and it hit like a sucker punch. My hands trembled with a mix of anger and hurt. My allergies have nothing to do with my ability to have a healthy child, Laura. Oh, darling, of course they do. But don't worry, she patted my arm with a coldness that could freeze hell. I'm sure there's still hope for you. Maybe. I was seething, every fiber of my being wanting to lash out, tell her off, defend myself and my future kids from her baseless judgments. But before I could formulate a response, Jake walked in, the picture of oblivious jeer. Hey, what's up? Mom, Emma, everything okay here? Laura transformed, the ice queen melting into a semblance of warmth. Just having a little chat with Emma. You know, girl talk. I looked at Jake, my eyes screaming for him to see through the charade. But as usual, he missed the silent cues. Cool, cool. Mom, you staying for dinner? The rest of the visit passed in a blur of forced civility and biting my tongue. After Laura left, I turned to Jake, the frustration and hurt bubbling over. Do you not hear the things she says to me? About us? Jake, ever the peacemaker, sighed. Emma, you know how she is. Just let it go, all right? It's not worth the stress. Not worth the stress? I echoed, incredulous. Jake, she's insinuating our child would be better off not being born. How is that not worth getting upset over? He didn't have an answer, just the same tired line about forgetting and moving on. But some things, some words, they stick with you, echoing long after they're spoken. And forgetting? Not as easy as it sounds. Life, as it turns out, has a funny way of throwing you for a loop when you least expect it. And sometimes, it's not a curveball, but a surprise so big, it knocks the wind right out of you, in a good way, mostly. I found out on a Tuesday. The sun was doing that thing where it's not quite ready to set, but you know it's thinking about it. I'd been feeling off for a bit, nothing major, just off. Enough that I grabbed one of those tests from the pharmacy. Just to rule it out, you know? So there I was, in our bathroom, staring at this little stick that had the audacity to change my entire world in the span of 3 minutes. Positive. I blinked. Looked again. Still positive. Jake. My voice echoed off the tiles, a mix of panic and something I couldn't quite place. He was there in a heartbeat, the worry lines on his forehead already in full display. What's up? Everything okay? I handed him the test, my hands shaking. Does this look positive to you? He took it, squinting at the tiny window before his eyes shot up to meet mine. Holy. Are you? Is this? Yeah. I managed, a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. I think we're having a baby. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with 1,000 unsaid things, until Jake wrapped me in a hug so tight I thought I might burst. This is amazing, Em. We're gonna be parents. Parents. The word felt foreign on my tongue, too big for me to fully understand just yet. But then, the reality of our situation crept in, the shadow of Laura's words lurking in the back of my mind. How would she react to this news? Would she see it as a miracle or just another thing to criticize? I voiced my fears to Jake, his arms still wrapped around me. What about your mom? You know what she's been saying. He pulled back, looking me straight in the eyes. Forget my mom, okay? This is about us, our family. We'll deal with her when we have to. Easier said than done, but in that moment, with the setting sun casting a warm glow around us, it felt possible. We were in this together, come what may. After the initial shock and joy had settled a bit, Jake suggested we call his parents to share the news. I felt a knot form in my stomach at the thought. Laura's reaction was the wild card I wasn't sure I was ready to deal with. Still, hiding it wasn't an option, and part of me hoped for the best. We started with Jake's dad, Michael. He picked up after the second ring, and Jake wasted no time. Dad, we've got some news. Emma's pregnant. The enthusiasm in Michael's voice was palpable, even through the phone. That's fantastic. Congratulations. I'm going to be a granddad. His genuine excitement was a balm to my anxious heart. If only we could bottle up his reaction and serve it to Laura. Speaking of the devil, it was her turn next. The call went on speaker, and after the usual pleasantries, Jake dropped the bomb. There was a pause, a long one, where you could practically hear Laura processing the news. Finally, she spoke, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. Well, this is unexpected. We must celebrate. I'll organize a family gathering in a couple of weeks. Invite everyone to share in the joy. Her words caught me off guard. Was this the same Laura who critiqued my every move, who doubted our future happiness? Jake, however, didn't skip a beat. That sounds great, Mom. We'll be there. I nodded in agreement, though no one could see it. What else could I do? Despite my reservations, this was an olive branch, wasn't it? Or a well-disguised thorn bush. Only time would tell. As we hung up, Jake was beaming, caught up in the excitement of becoming a dad and perhaps, naively, the hope that his mother's reaction signaled a change of heart. Me? I was more cautious, the skepticism a hard shell to crack. As I lay in bed that night, Jake's steady breathing a comforting rhythm beside me, my mind raced. What would this family gathering hold? Would it be a genuine celebration, or was I walking into a lion's den, dressed up as a baby shower? Laura's sudden shift from ice queen to gracious hostess didn't sit right with me. But, for Jake's sake and our baby's future, I was willing to play along, at least for now. The upcoming holiday loomed large in my thoughts, a mix of hope and unease swirling together. What would be waiting for us, indeed? Pulling up to Jake's parents' place felt like stepping onto a stage, the evening set for a performance with an audience of family members ready with their congratulations. The warmth from their well wishes was genuine, a stark contrast to the usual chill I felt from Laura. Yet tonight, even she managed a smile that seemed less forced than usual, her congratulations carrying a hint of something resembling happiness. But it was Michael, Jake's dad, who caught my attention, his usual bright demeanor replaced by a shadow of unease, his smiles fleeting and distracted. As we all gathered around the table, laden with more dishes than a holiday feast, I played it safe, sticking to the foods I knew were clear of my laundry list of allergies. That's when Laura, in a move that felt out of left field, gestured towards a sweet pie. "Emma, I made sure this was something you could enjoy. Special, just for you," she insisted, an edge of eagerness in her voice that I couldn't quite trust. Tentatively, influenced more by the hope of peace than appetite, I reached for a slice. But before it could even land on my plate, Michael's hand came out of nowhere, sending the plate, pie and all, crashing to the floor. The room fell into a stunned silence, every eye on us, Laura's face draining of color, her shock mirroring our own. The moment the plate hit the floor, breaking the silence like a dropped glass in a quiet room, Jake turned to his dad, his voice tight with confusion and anger. "Dad, why? Why would you do that?" Michael stood there, his usual easygoing demeanor gone, replaced by a seriousness that seemed out of place on his normally jovial face. The room was dead silent, everyone's eyes ping-ponging between Michael, the shattered plate, and us. Then, Michael's voice, usually warm and inviting, boomed across the living room with an intensity that made more than a few relatives flinch. "I can't be part of this crime," he declared, his eyes locked on Laura, who looked like she'd just seen a ghost. "You did what?" Jake's voice cracked, disbelief etching every word. Michael's next words felt like a punch to the gut. He pointed squarely at Laura, picked out and made dishes with peanuts and other stuff Emma can't have. She knew. She hoped it would hurt Emma, maybe even cause her to lose the baby. The silence that followed was suffocating. All eyes slowly turned to Laura, whose face had drained of color, then flushed a deep red, caught in the act by her own husband's admission. Laura, for once, seemed at a loss for words, her usual quick comebacks and sharp tongue nowhere to be found. The room felt frozen, the air thick with shock, disbelief, and a growing sense of outrage. Laura's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked from Michael to Jake to me, the realization of her actions and their consequences finally sinking in. The rest of the family started murmuring among themselves, the initial shock giving way to a chorus of disapproval and disbelief. Words like unbelievable and how could she bounced around the room, painting Laura as the villain in her own home. As for me, I stood there, rooted to the spot, the gravity of what Michael had revealed weighing heavily on me. The thought that Laura would go to such lengths, that she hated me so much she would risk my health, my baby's life, to get rid of me, it was too much to process. In the aftermath of Michael's shocking revelation, the room was enveloped in a stunned silence, broken only by Jake's incredulous and angry voice directed at his mother. "Mom, why do you hate Emma so much? What has she ever done to you to deserve this?" Laura's response was nothing short of explosive. "I can't stand her," she screamed, her voice laced with venom. "She's not right for you, Jake. She can't give you healthy children, and she's not worthy of being a part of this family." Jake's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before, his usual patience and tolerance for his mother's antics evaporating before my eyes. "That's enough, Mom," he barked back, his voice shaking with anger. "I can't believe you would go this far. I don't want to see you anymore. You're not the mother I thought I knew." The car ride home was tense, the air thick with unspoken words and heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Once we were home, Jake turned to me, his expression softening, the earlier anger replaced by remorse. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I should have stood by you sooner. I should have seen how toxic things were. I can't believe my own mother would do something like this." I could see the pain in his eyes, the struggle between his loyalty to his family and his love for me. "Jake, it's not your fault. We couldn't have known she would do something like this," I replied, trying to offer some comfort despite my own swirling emotions. But the damage was done. The relationship between Jake and his mother, once unbreakable, was now fractured beyond repair. Laura had become a pariah not just to us, but within our wider circle of family and friends. Her actions, driven by irrational hatred and unfounded fears, had isolated her completely. Michael, who had stood up and revealed the truth at the risk of his own marriage, eventually found it impossible to stay with Laura. The divorce wasn't immediate, but it was a foregone conclusion. Living with someone capable of such malice, who had plotted against their own unborn grandchild, was more than he could bear. Life, as they say, finds a way to march on, dragging us along for the ride, ready or not. After the storm settled, Jake and I found ourselves back in the rhythm of our daily lives, but with a newfound appreciation for the quiet moments of peace and an eagerness for the future, especially with our little one on the way. Michael, Jake's dad, became something of a fixture around our place. His presence was a balm, his willingness to help out around the house and his excitement about becoming a granddad were infectious. It was nice, having him around, feeling like we were building a new kind of family unit, one built on mutual respect and understanding rather than obligation and expectation. "We're really doing this, huh?" Jake would say, hands resting on my belly, a smile playing on his lips. "We're going to be parents." "Yeah," I'd reply, the reality of it all washing over me in waves of joy and nervous anticipation. "We're going to be great, you'll see." As for Laura, her name rarely crossed our lips these days. The wound she'd inflicted was still too fresh, the betrayal too sharp. Yet, whispers of her new life would occasionally find their way to us through the grapevine. Living in a small rented apartment, returning to the workforce after decades, it was a far cry from the comfortable life she'd once commanded with such authority. I'd be lying if I said I felt sorry for her. There was a time when I might have, when empathy for her situation would have come naturally. But after everything, sympathy was a hard sell. The choices she made, the malice with which she tried to tear our little family apart, it was unforgivable. "It's a shame, really," Michael would say on occasion, a distant look in his eye. "She made her bed, though." "Yeah," Jake and I would agree, the subject quickly changing to more pleasant topics. There was no joy in dwelling on Laura's downfall. Our focus was on the future, on the arrival of our child, on the family we were building together, one filled with love and devoid of the toxicity that had once threatened to consume us. "We've got each other," Jake would remind me, his hand finding mine, a silent promise of support and solidarity. "That's all we really need." And he was right. As we waited for the birth of our child, hope was a constant companion. Hope for health, for happiness, and for a future where the shadows of the past were just that, shadows, faint and inconsequential against the brightness of our new beginning. Life was ticking along just fine for me. At 28, designing apps was not just a job, but my passion. I've always been the type to stand on my own 2 feet, never really needing anyone to hold my hand through life's ups and downs. My parents, though miles away in another city, were always just a phone call away, but it's been years since I've asked them for anything more than their love and advice. My cozy apartment was my castle, a stone's throw from the hustle of the design studio, where I poured my creativity into work that felt more like play. I wasn't one for the club scene or loud parties. My idea of a perfect evening was diving into the latest design trends or exploring the genius of the greats in my field. But I did love the outdoors, the quiet solitude of the park near my place was my sanctuary. That's where this whole roller coaster started, on a path I'd walked 100 times before. I remember the day clearly. The sun was just right, not too harsh, casting a gentle glow over the park. I was lost in thought, headphones in, probably mulling over some project or another, when I stepped onto the bike path without looking. Out of nowhere, this guy on a bicycle screeched to a halt right in front of me. "Whoa! Watch where you're going," he shouted, a mix of annoyance and relief in his voice. Startled, I yanked out my headphones. "Oh, shoot. I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking." He was panting, catching his breath, but there was a smile starting to form on his face. Clearly. "You okay, though? Didn't mean to scare you." "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a bit shaken. And you?" "I'll live. Bikes can be replaced, people not so much," he said, leaning on his bike, now completely at ease. That's how I met Alex. He was your typical city guy, worked at a car sales company, always with a story to tell. He had this rugged charm about him, with a grin that could light up the darkest rooms. Despite our rocky start, we ended up chatting right there in the middle of the path. "So, you always jump in front of bikes for fun, or is today a special occasion?" he teased, the smirk never leaving his face. "Huh. First time for everything, I guess. I'm usually more aware of my surroundings," I shot back, trying not to show how embarrassed I was. "Alex," he said, extending a hand. I shook it. "Nice to meet you, Alex. I'm Lena. And let me guess, you're one of those artsy types, right? You've got that creative vibe." I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Yeah, I'm a designer. Applications, mostly." "Knew it," he exclaimed, as if he had won a prize. "I work in car sales. Not as glamorous, but it pays the bills." We talked for a bit longer, sharing bits and pieces of our lives. The conversation flowed so easily, it was like we'd known each other for years, not minutes. When we finally said goodbye, we exchanged numbers, and I walked away with a weird feeling in my stomach. Excitement, maybe? I wasn't sure. After that day in the park, Alex and I started seeing each other more and more. It wasn't long before what started as casual coffees after work turned into late-night dinners, and then whole weekends spent together. It was all so quick, yet it felt like the most natural progression in the world. One evening, after a particularly long day at the studio, I came home to find Alex already there, cooking dinner. The aroma of something delicious filled the small apartment, and for a moment, I was taken aback by how domestic and right it all felt. "Hey, you're home early," I said, dropping my keys on the table and heading straight for the kitchen. "What's all this?" "Just thought I'd surprise you with dinner," Alex replied without turning around. "You've been working so hard lately, figured you could use a break." I wrapped my arms around him from behind, resting my head against his back. "You're amazing, you know that?" He chuckled, turning around to face me with a mock bow. "Only the best for my girl. Now go get changed, dinner's almost ready." That night, as we sat eating the surprisingly delicious meal Alex had whipped up, the conversation took a turn I wasn't expecting. "So, I've been thinking," Alex started, his tone more serious than usual. "About?" I prompted, suddenly nervous. "Us. This. Everything we've got going on," he said, gesturing around the apartment. "I think it's time we took the next step." My heart skipped a beat. Next step? Yeah, you know, moving together. For real this time. No more back and forth between apartments. I was silent for a moment, mulling it over. It was a big step, but then again, wasn't this what I wanted? "Are you sure?" I finally asked. "It's a big commitment." Alex took my hand across the table, his gaze steady. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, and I want to make this work, for real." The sincerity in his voice melted any doubts I might have had. "Okay," I said, smiling. "Let's do it." And just like that, we began a new chapter together. Finding a new place was surprisingly easy, and before we knew it, we were signing the lease to a bigger, brighter apartment in a neighborhood that was new to both of us. It was exciting, decorating our shared space, making it ours. But with the new apartment came new realities, and the honeymoon phase couldn't last forever. One evening, a few months after we'd moved in together, the first real test of our relationship came to a head. "Can we talk, Lena?" Alex said, his tone serious as he sat down next to me on the couch. I muted the TV, turning to face him. "What's up?" "It's about us, our future. I've been thinking a lot about what I want our life to look like," he started, hesitating a bit before continuing. "I think it's time we talked about you maybe stepping back from work, focusing on us, our home." I felt a surge of frustration. Step back from work? "Alex, you know how much my career means to me." "I do, I really do. But can't you see? We could have so much more if we focused on building a life together, the traditional way." The traditional way. The words hung in the air between us, a stark reminder of our differing views on what our future should look like. "Alex, I love you, but I can't just give up on my dreams, my career. That's not the life I want," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just thought, you'd want the same things I do." It was the first of many conversations, each one a little harder than the last. We were in love, yes, but love wasn't always enough to bridge the gap between two very different visions for the future. One evening, as I was finishing up a project on my laptop, Alex came home, looking like he had something on his mind. He dropped his keys on the table with a clatter that seemed louder in the quiet of our place. "So, babe, we need to talk," he began, his tone more serious than I'd heard in a while. I closed my laptop, sensing this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "What's up?" "It's about us, about how we're living. I've been thinking, maybe it's time we start thinking about the future, about kids, Alex said, avoiding my eyes. "Kids? Alex, my job is super important to me right now. We've talked about this. Why bring it up again out of nowhere?" I replied, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Because things change, people change. Isn't it normal to want a family? To want my wife to be more present at home?" His words felt like a slap. "So, what, you want me to just drop everything? My career? Just so I can fit into your idea of a normal family?" I shot back, the hurt clear in my voice. "It's not like that. It's just, that's how families work. The wife takes care of the home, and the husband provides." "It's normal," Alex said, his voice rising slightly. "Normal for who, Alex? Because it sure doesn't sound like the life I want. We're supposed to be a team, remember?" But it wasn't just Alex. His mom, Mrs. Peterson, living just too conveniently close, turned our home into her personal project. Her visits became more frequent, each one leaving me feeling smaller and more incompetent in my own home. One afternoon, she came over unannounced, as had become her habit. I was in the middle of work, and the sight of her made my stomach twist. "Hello, dear. I just thought I'd drop by. To see how you're managing," she said, her voice dripping with a condescension I hadn't grown used to. "Managing just fine, thanks. I'm actually quite busy with work right now," I replied, trying to keep my tone polite. "Oh, I see. Still glued to that screen, I see. And what about Alex? Shouldn't you be taking care of him, making sure he has a nice home to come back to?" She began her inspection, finger-testing surfaces for dust, skiing under her breath. "Alex is a grown man, he can take care of himself. And this home is just fine," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. "It's just, when I was your age, I made sure my husband and home were my top priorities. Maybe if you spent less time on that computer and more time in the kitchen, things would be different," she suggested, not so subtly. I clenched my jaw, biting back the harsh words itching to spill out. "Thanks for the advice, but I think we're managing just fine." She huffed, clearly unimpressed with my response, and continued her critique tour of my home. After what felt like an eternity, she left, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Alex's and his mother's pressure didn't let up. It was as if they'd teamed up, launching a well-coordinated assault on my independence and career. I remember the day I made the decision to pretend to quit my job. It felt like surrendering, but with a plan in mind. Sitting across from Alex at our small dining table, I braced myself for the conversation. The air was thick with tension, a silent witness to the countless arguments that had preceded this moment. "Alex, we need to talk about this whole job thing," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Oh? What about it?" "I've been thinking a lot about what you and your mom have been saying, about family and priorities," I said, each word measured, careful not to betray my true feelings. "And," he prompted, leaning in slightly. "And, I've decided to quit my job. To focus on us, on our home," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. For a moment, Alex just stared at me, then his face broke into a relieved smile. "Really? Babe, that's great. I knew you'd come around. This is going to be so good for us." "Yeah, great," I echoed, a hollow feeling settling in my chest. The plan was simple. I had talked to my boss earlier that week, explaining the situation. He was understanding and offered me the chance to work remotely, a lifeline I clung to like a buoy in stormy seas. So, every morning, after Alex left for work, I'd open my laptop and dive into my designs, the creative work a balm to my troubled mind. The savings account I opened was a silent testament to my rebellion, a secret fund that grew with every project I completed. It felt like leading a double life, one where I played the dutiful wife in Alex's presence and a successful designer in his absence. One day, while I was deep in work, a knock on the door jolted me back to reality. It was Alex, home early. Panicking, I slammed my laptop shut and shoved it under the couch, just as he walked in. "Hey, what's up? Why are you home so early?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Meeting got cancelled. What's up with you? You look guilty as sin," he joked, but his eyes narrowed slightly, noticing my flustered state. "Just surprised to see you, is all. Wasn't expecting you back so soon," I replied, forcing a laugh. He shrugged it off, thankfully, and the moment passed, but it was a close call, too close. That night, as we lay in bed, Alex turned to me, a serious look on his face. "You know, I've been thinking. Since you're home all day now, maybe we could start thinking about, kids." The topic again. It felt like no matter how much I did, how much I pretended, it would never be enough. "Kids? Alex, we've talked about this. I'm not sure now is the right. But it's perfect timing. You're at home, we're stable. What's holding us back?" he interrupted, his tone a mix of frustration and eagerness. "Everything," I wanted to shout. My job, my independence, our entire relationship hanging by a thread. But I swallowed those words, replacing them with a non-committal. "We'll see, Alex. Let's just take it one step at a time." 3 months into our experiment of living off Alex's salary alone, the cracks were showing, wide and alarming. Our finances were a mess, stretched thinner than I thought possible. I hadn't touched the savings I'd secretly stashed away yet, clinging to the hope that Alex would see reason. But when we sat down to discuss our financial predicament, it blew up in my face. "Alex, we can't keep going like this. We're barely making ends meet. I think it's time I went back to work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He slammed his coffee cup down, his face clouding over. "Back to this again? I told you, we're fine. You just need to cut back on spending." "Cut back?" I was already stretching every penny till it screamed. "Cut back on what, Alex? We're already down to the basics. I haven't bought anything for myself in months." "That's not the point. You need to learn to manage better. My mom raised a family on less." He shot back, his words like daggers. I was fuming. His inability to see the reality of our situation was baffling. Before I could argue further, the conversation was cut short by his phone ringing. He picked up, listened for a moment, then hung up with a sigh. "Mom's coming over tomorrow. She thinks she can give us some tips on budgeting," he said, as if that solved everything. Great. A lecture on thriftiness from the woman who still did her son's laundry. Just what I needed. The next day, his mom, Mrs. Peterson, arrived with all the subtlety of a bulldozer. Without so much as a hello, she launched into her sermon on saving and scrimping, her voice grating in my ears. "You know, dear, when Alex was a boy, we didn't have much. But we made do. Maybe you need to reconsider your priorities," she began, her tone patronizing. I bristled. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Peterson, but I assure you, I'm very careful with our expenses." She sked, waving a hand dismissively. "It's all about sacrifices. Maybe less dining out, more home cooking. Every little bit helps." Dining out? We hadn't seen the inside of a restaurant in months. Her assumptions were baseless and insulting. I'm quite capable of running our household without resorting to extreme measures. Perhaps what we actually need is additional income, I countered, my patience wearing thin. Mrs. Peterson shook her head, a smirk playing on her lips. "My son works hard enough. It's not about earning more, it's about spending less. You'll see. With a few adjustments, you'll manage just fine." The adjustments she suggested were ludicrous. "Clip coupons," she said, as if I hadn't already scoured every circular and app for discounts. "Cook in bulk," as if our freezer wasn't already stocked with meals stretched to their limits. After she left, I was seething. Not only had Alex dismissed my concerns, but now I was being schooled on frugality by a woman who still thought a gallon of milk cost $1. After the whole budget lecture fiasco from Mrs. Peterson, I was at my wit's end. I needed some real advice, someone who'd understand without judging. So, I called the one person I knew would give it to me straight, my mom. I barely got 2 sentences in when Alex barged into the room, his face twisted in anger. He must have heard me talking about going back to work. "Who are you complaining to now?" he snapped, yanking the phone from my hand so hard I nearly lost my balance. I was shocked. "Give me back my phone, Alex. I'm talking to my mom." A wife airing dirty laundry? What next? "You gonna tell her I'm a lousy husband?" His words were sharp, cutting deep. "We're discussing our options, not you. And since when is talking to my mom a crime?" I shot back, my own anger rising. The argument spiraled out of control, words flying like bullets. Before I knew it, Alex stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard the walls shook. He disappeared for hours, leaving me to stew in a mix of worry and fury. He came back late, reeking of booze and bitterness. The look in his eyes was something I hadn't seen before. "You think you're better than me, huh? Making more money, showing me up?" He slurred, his words sloppy but venomous. "That's not it, and you know it. We're struggling, Alex. I thought if I could work, we'd have a bit more breathing room." I tried to explain, keeping my voice even. He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Oh, so it's my fault now? I'm not good enough? Well, listen here, if you don't like how things are, you can just leave." I stared at him, disbelief and anger warring inside me. "It's 3 a.m., Alex. You're drunk, and you're not making any sense." I said leave, he shouted, stumbling towards me. I had no choice. I grabbed the essentials, my phone, wallet. When I reached for my purse, he snatched it away. "Where do you think you're going with that? That's my money in there." His words were like a slap. I'd contributed to that money, saved from my secret work. But arguing felt pointless. I called a taxi and left, the cold night air sobering. Checking into a nearby hotel, I realized this was a turning point. There was no going back from here. The marriage I thought I had, the life I was trying to build with Alex, it had crumbled away. But I had my strength, my skills, and a little bit of savings to start anew. It was a cold comfort, but it was something. Walking into the lawyer's office the next day, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. The weight of my decision pressed down on me, but the need for freedom propelled me forward. The lawyer, a stern-faced man with a surprisingly gentle voice, listened intently as I laid out my situation. He didn't waste any time, pulling out document after document, explaining each step with patience. "You're making a brave choice," he said, handing me a pen. "Sign here, here, and here. We'll take care of the rest." I signed each paper with a steady hand, my heart racing. It was official now. I was filing for divorce. Returning to the apartment felt surreal. Alex was still passed out on the couch, oblivious to the world crumbling around him. I moved quietly, efficiently, packing my life into boxes and suitcases. Each item I picked up felt like shedding a layer of the past. As I zipped up the last suitcase, Alex groaned, his eyes blinking open. "Hey, where's my beer?" he mumbled, his voice rough. I couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of the moment. "Beer's the last thing you need to worry about, Alex." He sat up, squinting at the bags. "What's this? You leaving?" "Something like that," I replied, holding out the divorce papers. "Consider this my final goodbye." He took the papers, a smirk spreading across his face as he scanned them. "This is a joke, right? You'll come back, apologizing, and I might just take you back if you promise to behave." The laugh that escaped me was bitter, laced with freedom. Apologize? For what? For finally standing up for myself? No, Alex. This is it. I'm done. He tossed the papers aside, the smirk fading. "You think you can just walk out? You'll be back." I shook my head, a sense of peace settling over me. "I won't. And you'll see that I'm better off without you." With that, I grabbed my bags and left the apartment for the last time. The new place was small, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Located just a stone's throw from my old job, it represented a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life on my terms. I decided to reach out to my old boss, hoping there might be a chance to dive back into work fully. Picking up the phone felt like lifting a weight off my shoulders. "Hey, it's me. I was wondering if we could talk about maybe coming back to work," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, and then, "Of course. We've missed your talent around here. When can you start?" "Really? That's great. I can start immediately. Thank you so much." The joy in my voice was palpable. Returning to work felt like coming home. My colleagues welcomed me back with open arms, and slipping back into the rhythm of design and creativity was exhilarating. I was where I belonged, doing what I loved, surrounded by people who respected and valued me. One day, after a particularly successful project presentation, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Curiosity piqued, I answered. "Hello? Lena, it's me, Alex. I heard you're doing well. That's good." His voice was a jolt from the past, but I felt detached, removed from the hurt and anger. "Thanks. What do you want, Alex?" I lost my job. Things are tough. I was thinking, maybe, you could help me out? And, maybe we could try again?" The audacity of his request was staggering. After everything, he still thought he could lean on me, use me as a safety net. "Alex, that part of my life is over. I'm moving forward, not backward. You should do the same." There was silence on the other end, and then a resigned sigh. "Yeah, I guess you're right. Take care, then." Hanging up, I felt a surge of empowerment. I had turned the page, ready to write new chapters on my terms. Life now was about rediscovering who I was outside the shadow of a failed marriage. It was about reclaiming my independence, my identity, and my happiness. I started to explore new hobbies, reconnect with old friends, and even began to entertain the idea of dating again, but with a newfound sense of self-worth and clarity about what I deserved.